when I used to work at KOLD, I would generally, like if there was a Friday night game, sometimes they'll play a Friday night game or an off night game where I'm not anchoring, then I would generally be at those games, or I would generally go up to the ASU game, when it was in Tempe, or, later in the season when they would occasionally have a day game, I might be down there for at least part of the game, maybe not the whole game, but the first half and that kind of thing. I think like last year, I think I left the Oregon State game. I think it was the day game. I think I left that game at halftime. But, of course, it was over at halftime.
Right,
so
that was awful.
It was okay. It was funny. I tell people that game. I said, yeah, there were more. When I left that game, I drove through Main Gate Square, and there were more people on Main Gate Square at halftime of the U of A game than there were still in the stadium that day.
It's funny because you're telling people your secrets in TV. Most of them don't go to the games, and then they just report on the highlights. Let me say this to you: your profession has changed so much in the last 3-4 months. Sports is very rare now because there's so many things going on. Do you think it'll return to what it used to be?
I don't know. I think we've had this conversation before. I think I hope that it will. I know that there's some people in our building that aren't so sure that it will. We've performed pretty well on bad or good. I think me and Paul have both performed pretty well on the news side. So now they may look at us differently than they did before in terms of our capabilities and how we're most useful to the team. But I would think that, we were the one station that was still committed to sports before COVID. Not that the other stations weren't, but staffing-wise, they had, reduced down to one each at the other two stations. We're still the only station with 2 full-time staffers. So I would think that, we will eventually have some type of sports presence again. Will it be a blocked sports presence in that third segment around 20 after or so, or 50 after, as it was before? I'm not sure. The other stations have kind of gone in an instance to where it's more of a, news of the day kind of thing. But and there's nothing wrong with that, but I also think you lose out on a lot when you're just focusing maybe on one story per day. And I just think there's so many things that if we ever get back to normal sports where there's games and events, I just think you lose out on a lot of stories when you're just focusing maybe one reporter on one thing kind of concept. So I would think eventually we're going to get back to it. Will we have 3.5 minutes? Maybe not. Maybe it's less time. Maybe it's down to 2:45 or something of that nature. But you'll just kind of make the best of what time they give you and try to, again, continue to cover as much as you can.
So based on what we all know, and we sit in on these news conferences and we're reading stuff, what do you think college football is going to look like in the fall?
I would be shocked if it starts on time. I would not be surprised if it starts later than September, the regular season. I also would not be surprised if it's more of if it's kind of maybe just more of a conference type thing where you're not playing a lot of non-conference games where you're just focused on the teams in your conference. I could see that kind of being this year as well. And I just think it's going to be the stadiums won't be at capacity. I mean, they're going to, U of A, just take U of A for example, but they average maybe draw about 40,000. I think they would probably, I could honestly see that being cut in half to where they might allow, 20 to 25,000 people in there if they could space it out properly.
So like last year.
Wow, Steve.
There was a few more people there last
28,
year.
don't give me 28.
Yeah, I think that the crowds are going to be smaller if they even allow crowds at all. And
wait, David, real quick. Let me interrupt you real quick. We got about 20 seconds. How many games are going to win? I want to see if you match Mr. Gonzalez's.
Oh my God, I know a lot of people are doing that. That's too premature for me. I haven't even really looked at the schedule. I know a lot of people are saying 4-8.
Just say 6. Say 6.
Say 6.
Say 6.
I'll say 6-6 then.
Oh, jeez.
But that's a guess without any. I haven't even looked at the schedule yet to even kind of begin to pick that apart.
Right.
I think the fact that they've got a quarterback, I think is a benefit for this team moving forward.
There you go, Dave. You think like me.
Dave, thanks for calling in.
Hey, thanks a bunch, Dave. We appreciate having you today.
Be safe.
No problem.
Be
guys.
safe. Thank you.
Take care.
Hey, welcome back to Wire on the Ball here on 1030 The Voice. I'm Steve Rivera. alongside Jay Gonzalez. Where were you 10 years ago, Jay, when the Pac-12 or Pac-10 went to the Pac-12?
Well, I was actually out of the country. We were, when
We could get out of the country.
Yeah, when we could. At the height of that, when it was all coming together, I was on a family trip down in Rocky Point, where normally we would be sitting on the beach, drinking a Corona, kind of hanging out, enjoying listening to Little Jimmy Buffett, all that kind of stuff. Instead, a whole bunch of us. It's a large family trip. We're in a large house, and so there's about 30 of us there all together with wives and kids and whatnot. But all the guys were basically sitting around a dining room table with our computers out, just watching this thing develop on the internet, because we had internet access there, and just watching everything that was going on. And that I just recall how it was changing by the minute, kind of like the COVID thing. And what was intriguing to us is that the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 at the time was kind of leading all of it. Larry Scott had just come on as the Pac-10 commissioner, and that was one of his charges. He was supposed to lead the expansion, and all the things that were going on, where the Pac-10 nearly became the Pac-16. It ended up settling at 12, and then there was realignment all over the place. Nebraska went to the Big Ten, and then they went and got Maryland and Rutgers. Texas A&M and Missouri went to the SEC. The Big 12 was gutted. Then they had to go get some more teams. Everybody left the WAC to go to the Mountain West, and the Mountain West became a 16-team conference. And all of that happened in this brief time over the summer. And it was fascinating to watch, but what became even more fascinating was the stories that have come out since then about how that whole thing developed.
Behind the scenes.
All the behind-the-scenes stuff. And really, as it turned out, a lot of it was centered on the way it ended up flushing out was based on what happened in the Pac-10, and when you hear the accounts, and I think The Athletic was the one that did this, did a comprehensive piece on each conference and what happened to their expansion, and it was really it all surrounded the University of Texas, and the Pac-12 had invited, or the Pac-10 had invited 6 teams. It was Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and Colorado.
Yeah.
And so basically they were taking, 6 teams.
No Utah.
Right. Utah was not in that group. They were basically taking 6 teams out of the Big 12 and gutting the conference. And Nebraska was already going to the Big 10. So there were 5 teams that were going to be left in the Big 12. And then Missouri was starting to head towards the SEC. So really the Big 12 was going to be left to nothing. It would be Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, and who's the other one? Can't think who's the other one.
Kansas, Iowa. I don't know.
One more team. Anyways, so as it turned out, Texas A&M, the Texas schools in Oklahoma and Oklahoma State were coming to the Pac-12, to the Pac-10. And what ended up happening was the Texas schools tried to force the Pac-10 to take Baylor instead of Colorado.
What about Texas Tech?
They were going to take Texas Tech, but they wanted the Texas schools tried a big move to move, a power move to make the Pac-10 take Baylor, and the Pac-10 was not going to take Baylor strictly because of academics. And I think one of the things, as a side note, that a lot of people don't realize, that these conferences, academics is a big deal.
Sure.
People ask, why wouldn't the Pac-10 take, or the Pac-12 take Boise State, that's got this great football program? They're very competitive in their other sports, and it's their academic standards don't meet the Pac-10 or the Pac-12 standard.
Well, you talk about that. That's how Arizona got into the Pac-10.
Right, and we can talk about that in a second. But that's how Arizona and Arizona State got into the Pac-10, because of their academics, and the Pac-10 just said, we're not taking Baylor, forget it, and that's when the Texas schools bailed. Colorado still came, and then the Pac-10 went and got Utah, and then the Big 12 survived. They became a 10-team league. Then they added TCU and West Virginia. So, and
there could be shakeups at any other time,
right? And they're people still talk about there being still realignment, but at that time, what was starting to build was that instead of a Power 5, there were going to be 4 16-team conferences, with 2 divisions and all that type of stuff. And so, but the whole process of that to me was fascinating, and the power plays that were being that were going on,
right.
and I believe it was the governor of Texas was the one who said, take Baylor or take none of us, and the Pac-10 said none of you.
No.
So
It's funny because you talk about that. They could have easily taken Texas Tech or something, Texas A&M or something. But that's funny. That bluff or power play did not work.
It did not work
when the Pac-8 to the 10 worked.
Right, and that one of the great fascinating stories, and we've only got about 5 minutes before our next break, but I love talking about this because now we're talking. I was a teenager when all this was happening, when the Pac-8 became the Pac-10.
78, right?
Well, actually, the actual
Working
invitation came in 76,
Okay.
and the Arizona and Arizona State actually joined competitively, started playing
78.
in 78, the 78-79 school year. But the Pac-8 was interested in getting Arizona and Arizona State. John Schaefer, who was the president at Arizona, wanted to take the Arizona schools into the Pac-10, into the Pac-8. ASU did not want to go because they were dominating the the WAC, both in football, basketball, baseball. I mean, they were they were the top of the heap.
They ran the WAC,
and they knew, and I think they knew that if they moved to the the Pac-8, become the Pac-10, that was all going to go away, which it did.
Right. But Arizona's appeal.
But Arizona wanted to get in because of the prestige of being affiliated with Stanford and Cal
right.
and Washington and UCLA and USC.
And academically, they were
right
with the medical school.
Right. And so it was a move primarily for academics, but also for athletics. Now Arizona's at the big boy table, and they wanted to do that as well.
And it gave you guys hope that one day, someday, at some point, you're going to get to the Rose Bowl.
It did, and we're still waiting. We're still sitting on the corner waiting for somebody to pick us up and take us to the Rose Bowl.
Right.
But
no, that's an interesting story. It was an interesting story. And ASU, you're right. They kind of just said, I'm not sure.
They went kicking and screaming. They really didn't want to go. But the great move was, and this was documented in a story a couple of years ago that ran in the San Jose Mercury News. A gentleman who was the vice chancellor at UCLA at the time. His name is John Sandbrook. He was at the meetings where all this was taking place.
And it's funny, he was like a 25-year-old.
Yeah,
dude.
he was a young guy, and he was sort of an assistant to everybody, and he was sort of as a kind of like a gopher who was there to go get this guy, go get that guy. And what ended up happening was the day that all the 8 schools had gotten together to make the decision, and they needed a unanimous vote. And there was sort of a prearranged agreement that they were all going to vote yes, but they actually had to get all the presidents in the room to ratify this. And Washington and Stanford suddenly were saying no. And the reason being that the Washington and Stanford presidents were not at the previous meeting where they had sent a representative who had said, yes, we're agreeing to this. So they show up at this meeting, they say, no, we're not voting for this. And a meeting broke up, and everybody left the room, and people were mad, and they're upset that this thing's falling apart, and it looks like it's not going to happen. So then everybody goes out, they reconvene the meeting, and it looks like it's falling apart. And 15 minutes later, they come out of the meeting, and the Pac-10 was formed.
It seemed to me that meeting was in Arizona.
No, it was in San Francisco.
San Francisco, because they talked about a lot of the press.
Right. Now, a previous meeting, I think, had been in Phoenix, but this particular meeting was at a hotel near the San Francisco airport. But a lot of the Arizona press was there, waiting to hear.
Okay.
Are Arizona and Arizona State going to get in the Pac?
That makes sense.
Pac-8?
But it wasn't even that easy in your discussions of them having to break up the meeting, them getting upset, coming back 15 minutes later, because the power play.
There was a huge power play, and what's and if you go back to if you Google, Arizona schools joining the Pac-8. You'll come up with an article that talks about this. This was done 2 years ago, so it had been 40 years since this happened. And the story goes that when they got back in the meeting, and the Washington and Stanford presidents had both said, "We're not voting for this," the USC president said, "If you don't do this, we're leaving the league."
Mm-hmm.
And 15 minutes later,
they said they're bringing UCLA with them.
And they were taking UCLA with them.
Yeah.
In that gap, when one meeting ended and the other meeting, and the UCLA and USC presidents got together, and the USC president said, "If they don't vote for this, we're leaving. Will you go with us?"
Right.
And they said yes.
Right.
And so they go back into the meeting, and the presidents find out that if they don't vote for this, that UCLA and USC are both leaving the league.
Right.
And that was it.
Because they also threatened, if you don't agree, we're going outside with the press and tell them this is immediate.
Right. They're going to tell them that they were out of the league,
right,
and it was going to break up the league's agreement with the Rose Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as John Wilner put it, the Pac-8 just about blew up.
Yeah.
And it nearly did.
The Pac-6.
And instead, in a matter of 15, 20 minutes, the Pac-8 became the Pac-10. Arizona and Arizona
Right.
State were in, and the rest is sort of history.
Right. I'm sure, as I read the story as well, that the USC was like, let's try this. If it doesn't work, we're screwed.
Well, yeah. I mean, you feel like they were playing Texas Hold'em and pushed all the chips to the middle,
right,
and said, "We're going. We're all in."
Mm-hmm. And say, hey, UCLA, we need more power.
Right. And at that time, at that period of time, UCLA and USC were the league.
Sure.
They were the league.
And they're obviously, without one, there's not the other.
Right.
There's always kind of one in prick and frack or whatever you want to call them.
But and not to sound overly, I don't know what the right word is, but and maybe we can talk about this after the break. But think about what Tucson would be if the U of A had not gotten into the Pac-10.
Oh, sure. It'd be, you know what it'd be? University of New Mexico.
Exactly. And a lot of things have happened in this community because of that.
Sure.
And people say,
Lute Olson would not have been
right.
there.
People want to say that sports is overblown. Well, in this, sometimes it's not, and I'd love to have a chance.
We could talk about it. If you want to call in,
that.
please do. This is interesting. 790-2040. But we're going to take our first break or our last break here on 1030 The Voice. Hey, welcome back to Wind the Ball here on 1030 The Voice. I'm Steve Rivera alongside Jay Gonzalez. Kind of cool reminiscing about the good old days. But you're right. If they had not gotten in, I grew up in New Mexico, it would have been New Mexico.
Right. It would have been the University of New Mexico. It would have been, Colorado State University, fine institutions all. But when you think about what the university has become, on a worldwide basis as a research institution, with the medical school that it has, and all of those things, and even put it down to today, how the U of A has a heart surgeon as its president, and has kind of been leading the way on a lot of the COVID issues. I mean, just think if the schools don't get into the Pac-8 back 40 years ago, what is our community like?
Sure.
Lute Olson doesn't come to coach in the WAC, and I've said a number of times, publicly and otherwise, let's think about what people would think about U of A athletics if basketball hadn't become what it is. So people who kind of say that all this is overblown sometimes, it's not. I mean, I firmly believe that we would be a very different community if the University of Arizona was still a Western Athletic Conference school.
At some point, people who kind of don't pay attention, it's kind of the face of the program. You have a successful program. Oh, that's in Tucson.
Right.
Oh, where you go? That's in Tucson.
Right.
You're no longer Arizona State. You're Arizona.
Right. How many people know about Tucson because they saw an NCAA tournament and the excitement behind an Arizona basketball team, or a bowl game or whatever it might be.
I have a quick question, a personal question, but Tom, it seems like you're trying to get in to say something.
Well, I had an interesting thought, guys, and one thing that you have to remember in this historical perspective of it all is back then what made the threat credible was the fact that you could be an independent and survive. And many schools did and were powerful independents like Notre Dame, Penn State. These were schools that were not in conferences back then, and they were doing just fine on their own. I think in today's climate, you almost couldn't do that because you're almost too dependent on the Power 5 conferences.
That's a good point.
You absolutely are. And you look at the way Notre Dame has structured itself now. They are, for the most part, an ACC school. You know, they've kept their independence to keep the money that they've got coming in and their network and all that type of stuff. But they essentially play an SEC schedule in all sports.
Yeah. So back to my personal question before the time. So you've never left here.
Right.
I came here from Dallas. I was there for just a summer, from New Mexico. I liked this destination. I was an intern at the Daily Star in the mid-'80s, wanted to come here. But you've been here. I think a lot of people still think, well, back in the day, it was dusty Tucson. It was not to be respected. People in Phoenix still feel that way. You know what I'm saying? But you've never left. Why is that?
I never left because first of all, my family is all here. And so, but, you know, as a reporter, and you know how reporters are, you know, they go work at a paper for 5 years and then go to the next one and go to the next one. And I had opportunities to leave, but the places I went to, I never felt like I found a place that I felt more comfortable and thought was a better place to live. I did, and I've said this a million times to people, you know, and friends who might be listening, they've heard me say this a number of times. I found places that I could live, but not places that I'd rather live. I loved San Diego. I love that place, but I love, you know, I can go there for a week at a time and whatnot. I really like Denver a lot. I thought that was a cool place, and I really like Seattle a lot. And those are just places I got a chance to go to. You know, I interviewed for a job in Orlando, interviewed for a job in Fresno. So there were, you know, opportunities. And my wife and I were both reporters, and we kind of became a package deal, and we looked at a couple of places, and then it just kind of, we all kept coming back here, and it just seemed more comfortable here.
Right. No, that's why I stayed, and I enjoy here. But you understand the dusty town. It would have remained the dusty town.
And you know what? And it would have been. But you know what? I really didn't care what people thought of Tucson. I never thought of it that way. I liked it here. You know, as I got older and, you know, knew I was going to be raising a family and whatnot, I wanted to do it here because it has what I need. It has what I want. I love college sports. And I can, you know, especially with them being in the Pac-12,
you get quality sports.
I get to see USC. Yeah. I saw, you know, Notre Dame come to town. I've seen Oklahoma. I've seen Ohio State. You know, we got to get Michigan here. Those weenies won't come here, but you know, I've gotten to see some, you know, these schools that you see on TV and whatnot. Duke has come and played basketball. North Carolina has come and played basketball. Kansas has. You're
doing it without having to.
Without having to go somewhere that I don't want to be.
Right. Well, you're from out of town, Tom. You feel it's probably the same way. You came here for a reason. You're still here, but you had a chance, you know, at a decent level.
Yeah, and I'm still, I guess, Steve, career-wise, at a point where I know that I've got a couple moves left. So just like you guys were itinerant at one point in your careers, I understand that I'm still at that point in mind. I know that I'm not done moving around. I've accepted that. And I've made my personal sacrifices along the way. Like I have a marriage burning at the roadside a couple years behind me. I don't have any kids. Like those are all choices I had to make in order to pursue this certain type of lifestyle.
So before you got here, what was your impression of Tucson?
I didn't know much about it, honestly. Coming into Tucson, I didn't know what to expect.
Did it exceed your expectations?
No. No, and it's hard to exceed expectations that you don't have, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just really wasn't sure what I was coming into, and I tried to do as much research as I could, but when I got here, I'll be honest with you, nothing I read online prepared me for what Tucson actually was.
Right. It's funny, though, because you talk about you can go other places. Phoenix is just up the road.
Right.
You don't have to deal with all that.
Right.
But you can still go up there and spend the weekend. I covered the Suns for a long time, and I enjoyed it tremendously. But guess what? I got to come home.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing about where we are here. If we want to do any of that, we can. You can go to an NFL game 2 hours away. You can go to an NBA game 2 hours away. You can go to a Major League Baseball game 2 hours away. But then you can come back here.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that. It's like that whole adage. It's great to be a grandparent because
the kids
the
go
kids
away.
go home.
Yeah.
Right.
Welcome to Mayberry, baby. Mayberry's not that bad.
You know, and then, you know, even beyond that, you know, Southern California is, you know, just a few hours away. I mean, I don't mind driving, you know, the 6 hours to San
Right.
Diego to go hang out on the beach, or the
Vegas is
or
6
the
hours away.
the 8 hours to go to you know, to go to LA and go to Disneyland or whatnot.
Right.
You know, like you said, Vegas is what, 6.5 hours away, 5.5 hours if you're driving. If my brother Rick is driving, but we you know, we can go to Vegas, and
Right.
we do, and all those things are within reach, and yet, you know, you still get to come back here.
Well, it's funny because you know how you're on the Pac-10. So, you're in Tucson. I think it's a tremendous place. And then we say, Pullman? You're going to go to Pullman? People in Pullman saying, I love this place.
They love that place.
Oregon State and Corvallis. You know, you go to Eugene and Corvallis. You've been to Corvallis.
Yeah,
There's nothing there.
yeah.
But people love it there.
Well, see, and it's funny because Eugene was one of my favorite cities on the Pac-12 road.
It's mine for sure.
I loved Eugene. I loved going there. Well, I was doing it was Pac-10 when I was back doing that. I loved going to Eugene, and one of the reasons was it reminded me of Tucson because it had the things that Tucson had, the college town. Yeah, and I mean, you know how we are, right? You're a beat writer. You go in on a Friday, you drop your bags off, and you head to the great bars, right?
Yeah, right.
And it had that college town feel, and I loved that about it. Whereas, you know, when you went to the Bay Area, man, you were in the big city.
You were on
hard,
a train trying to
right.
get downtown.
It was hard to get places and those kinds of things. So.
In LA, you're taking 25 hours to go 7 miles.
Right, same thing.
It would happen to me and my ex one day.
Yeah, same thing. So, you know, I've just stayed here because Tucson has always been comfortable to me. It continues to be comfortable to me, and I haven't found a good reason to leave. Let me put it that way.
Let's imagine too, because you can dream, and I know you have. If this place had a football program, how cool this place would be.
Like it doesn't have one?
No.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yes. Sorry to say. You're hoping for 6-6.
I know, but look, I've enjoyed how much of a part of my life Arizona football has been, and the few ups that we've had, and the downs that have come with it. You know, as I look back, am I unhappy that Arizona hasn't gone to a Rose Bowl? Absolutely, but I don't. With a few exceptions, the Mackovic years being one of them, and then, you know, coming out of that and how long it took Arizona to come out of that. I've enjoyed, you know, the experience I've had with Arizona football. It's been fun. There've been some great times, been some great games. There've been some great people that have been a part of it, and you know, the way I've been a part of it in my own way, from a personal standpoint, whether it's football or basketball or whatever, all that's been great. Yeah, there's still that thing hanging out there that needs to happen. But aside from that, I've had a great time. Look, Arizona was never going to be USC. It was never going to be UCLA in football. But, you know what, from a basketball standpoint,
it is.
It is.
Yeah.
You know, Arizona is Duke, is Kansas, is Michigan, not Michigan, is North Carolina, you know, as it relates to basketball. And that's been good enough for me.
Yeah.
You know, I've enjoyed being a part of that.
I mean, the perspective like that is great. But I'm adding, if it was both on that level.
Oh, yeah. But, you know, I mean, when you think about the two schools when they joined the Pac-10, you know, ASU was sort of at the top of its game as a football school.
Yeah.
You know, they had had that one undefeated season and finished number 2 in the country. The only reason that they didn't finish number 1 as an undefeated team was because they were in the WAC. That alone.
Who was number 1? What year was that?
It was 1975. I want to say Oklahoma, I believe, was voted number 1 that year. And ASU beat kind of a so-so Nebraska team in the Fiesta Bowl, which at that time the Fiesta Bowl had been put together for ASU to be able to go to a bowl game. Yeah. And so like a 7-4 Nebraska team, you know, played in that game. ASU beat them on a late field goal. How I remember that, I don't know. But, you know, but they were undefeated. They were the only undefeated team in the country, and they didn't win the national championship because they were in the WAC.
Right. BYU did their thing.
Yeah, BYU goes and beats a 6-6 Michigan team in the Holiday Bowl, and they got the national championship. But the reason they got that was because there was such an uproar for Arizona State not getting it in 1975.
I didn't know that 75 story.
Yeah. So and Arizona went 9-2 that year against and losing that one game to ASU. A lot of stuff back there, but I've enjoyed my experience with Arizona football. I'll just say that right now.
Cool. I'm just telling you, it could be better.
It could. Oh, of course, it could be better.
Hey, good show today, Jay.
Right, we're going to have tomorrow.
Tell me. I forget.
Yeah, we're going to be handicapping the Belmont tomorrow.
Yes, good day. Thanks.